Growing Up on a Farm in Kentucky. Stories by Stan Schmidt. Episode 14. Louie.
Well, my dad had, I guess, a total of 3 men that would help out, that'd be available to help out with chores on the farm. And we had an old house. It was the original house that the Schmidts lived in, the previous generation to my dad's, before my grandfather built our house in about 1913, I think it was. And it was back closer to the old cow barn that was built about the same time. It was up on a hill, and it was kind of run down, but my dad would let workers just live in there as exchange, as part of their pay. And we had 3 workers. One was Mr. Housley. He was a coal miner all his life in Tennessee. And for a while there was a man there we just called Beard. I think that was his last name. Frazier. I guess Frazier was his last name, and Beard was his Beard Frazier. He was a black man. He lived there. And there was a third man, and his name was Louie. He was the son of the pastor of a black church in Jeffersontown, which was half a mile from our house. So he was from a prominent family, except that he had some eccentricities. His last name was Wordlow, Louie Wordlow, and he was from a family in Jeffersontown, about a half a mile away. But he worked for a lot of farmers. He worked for the Riggses that had a big farm up the road 3 miles from us. And we used to go up there and play with them when they were kids and we were kids. They had 12 kids. So we'd have a good time playing with them all day, especially if our dad didn't need us. And he worked for them. He worked for numerous other farmers that I'd never heard of, so he had a lot of experience. And he would come back if we were cleaning out the chicken house with the manure spreader and just loading load after load. He would tell stories while we waited for my dad to empty the loads on the fields, and then come back, and he'd have time. And while he was working, he would spin these stories, and sometimes you didn't know if he was making them up or if they were really true. But I still remember several of them, and my brothers all remember them, and our neighbors would tell us stories about things. Like even my dad told us a story one time, because Louie would always walk to work, no matter how many miles the farm was from where he slept. And a lot of times he would sleep in public buildings and near the furnaces in the winter, and in the basements, and people would just everybody knew him. Even the grocery store knew him. Man, our friend that owned the grocery store, and they would give him food. But he was a hard worker, and he never drank anything. He wasn't dangerous. He would drink soda pop and read comic books. That was his mentality, and he seemed to have a pretty good life. And one time we were cleaning out the chicken house, and he was getting impatient for how long it took my dad. He's like, "Why's your dad so slow? He's getting old. We've been waiting a long time for him." Hey, let me tell you a story about these fence rows I was cleaning out. I was cleaning fence rows out on somebody's farm all day long. He says, "You clean them fence rows out, and you know what's in there? Snakes. I caught 3 big ones and put them in a burlap bag." And then after I was done, I took them over to J-Town about 4:30 behind James Cute's gas station. There was a bunch of boys shooting craps, and they had a pile of money in the middle of the game, and it was getting bigger and bigger. They said, Louie, what you got in that sack? Show us what you got in that sack. And I said, no, you don't want to see what I got in my sack. You don't want to see. And I just waited and waited till that pile of money got bigger and bigger. Come on, Louie, show us what's in that sack. He said, oh, okay. And I dumped those snakes right out on the money. And you should have seen those cats scram. They were all gone. I just scooped up the money and put the snakes in the money all back in the sack and just took off. That was one of his stories. And he had many other stories, interesting stories. And it was fun to listen to him. It was almost like listening to somebody reading Brer Rabbit when you were a kid. You didn't know what to make of it, or if it was 100% true or what. But there's a story that my dad told about him. And my dad had a pickup truck, and he'd always drive over to J-Town to the hardware store, the gas station or something. And one time, it was only a half a mile from J-Town to our house, so we could walk over there when we were kids. And Louie was walking towards our farm. And Dad said, well, let me pull over and give him a ride. So he pulls over the pickup truck and says, Louie, you want to ride? And Louie would take those large strides, and he would really move fast. He just walked, he never ran, but he would walk 10 miles out to a farm to do the work. He was walking down the road. He saw my dad stop. Dad says, Louie, you want to ride? And Louie says, no, I'm in a hurry. And that story was so funny because it was so true about Louie. And it was just, there was an accumulation of these stories that gave him a reputation. I think he knew, more people knew him than most people that lived in Jeffersontown. And it was another interesting thing about growing up.